It's Wednesday again. Let's take a look at some DeFi charts for Brave New Coin. We'll start with the DeFi Perp Index, which is an amalgamation of all the charts I'm about to show to some degree. For the most part, everything is at risk for a full retracement to the January breakout. On top of that, we have a pending death cross. We broke the range, we broke VPVR support. This is volume up here, establishing some volume in this range, but ultimately this certainly looks ready to break the monthly pivot, ready for 3,300 on this index. Volume's finally starting to pick up here. Some emotion in the markets here. Gas is rising slightly. So people are finally caring that this is selling off. Either they're buying the dip or they're capitulating. Either way, you need to see that eventually to get something going here. The worst thing you can do is bleed in the dark. There is also on many of these charts the beginnings, the early trappings of a bullish divergence here on RSI, where you're getting lower lows with an equal or higher RSI, suggestive of weakening bearish momentum, along with volumes here, which also are lower than the previous higher low. So all that's to say, momentum is weakening. And something that you'll see on a lot of these charts that I don't talk about enough is the just general RSI trend, this curvature. We saw this with BTC in 2019, where RSI hit like 95 on this breakout, and then it ran for 3 months, right? But collectively, for 9 months, it established this convexity, concavity, I never remember which is which, that hints that we have this waning bullish momentum quality to us. So yeah, there was a bear div here on the way up, but that isn't always going to stop the party. Just like it won't stop the party on the way down. There was a 3 drives here, but it's always something to watch for in the opposite direction on any bearish movements. Even now we have this really strict downward trend on RSI for BTC that until we break this, it's hard to be convinced momentum is going to shift. And we see this momentum curvature in the DeFi perp as well, where we just couldn't break higher highs in momentum despite higher highs in price. This is just another way of showing a bearish divergence just on an extremely long time frame. This was 6 months or something. So that's always something to watch for on all these charts. We'll start with Link. Depending on how you want to look at this, if you want to look at the 365 MA multiplier, sell zone, buy zone, currently in the buy zone. If this holds, this may last many months, as these buy zones typically do for alts. This could just keep dropping, right? To 10, to 6, to 5, to 1. I'm not saying that that's where it will go. I'm just saying the indicator is just now starting to tell you it's time to buy, right? So told you to sell up here. Didn't even get up there on the most recent attempt, but it's just now starting to tell you to dollar cost average into Link. And this could go to 5, right? And it'll tell you every day, okay, it's time to buy, it's time to buy, if this multiplier is to be believed. Now we can also look at a pitchfork, which to me it's Dunsky because it's several days below. You know, the heart of the pitchfork without any additional wings is this yellow blue range, and we're definitely below that now. You can only start to add wings when there are wings up here to the opposite direction, right? We got just as overbought up here as we're likely to get to oversold down here. So that may save this, but that's probably more hopium than anything. And I'll just say that I don't have anything to do with Nexo and some on-chain short garbage that you'll see on the comments or on Twitter. I have no idea about any of that. Link looks like garbage like everything else in DeFi, so it's not like that is FUD or thereabouts related in any way. Now here's Uni, which again, everything just looks like, here's where all the volume in action was, support down here. We're just starting to bull div. I like this much better. Below 13, below 10, below 5. You know, ultimately that's where this lives. It's an airdrop after all. You know, that's it's another thing people need to realize. This was literally created out of nothing a few months ago. I zoomed in on the RSI here, but again, you can see this curvature to Uni that on the way up it held this channel, but it just couldn't break that momentum. Here's Aave, just like Link, equally as in trouble from a multi-year trend perspective. Death crossing below the pitchfork. Yearly opens at 92, somewhere in there. Just looks like it wants lower. It attempted to find some sort of bullish divergence here that broke. You could argue head and shoulders here as well. So none of this looks bullish at all, right? Like, okay, you want to buy the dip, be the hero. I don't care. It's your book, right? But it's just not for me. Here's Aave on the 365 MA multiplier, not even in the buy zone yet. And I think I had, the 183 as well. So the 183 is telling you it's getting in the buy zone, but this could go deep and for months, right? This was 6 to 7 months, and then an additional 2 months to 3 months before it finally did something. And this is an N of 1, right? It's never had a bear market other than the initial release. Everything took off, and then it took off again in January. So to me, all of DeFi just needs some time to establish reality for market caps and prices. It did get in the sell zone on the 365 multiplier. But again, this wasn't below for months. This was 9 months plus building that bullish baby down here before it finally took off. And it's not even there yet on the 365. Maker, very similar. Looks like it just wants to go back to the yearly open, the very least below the 365 MA multiplier. It did reach the multiple twice, really, on the way up. So I'm fairly confident that anything below 16 would look like a much better buy. The market really didn't care about Maker until January. I think it got added to a bunch of indexes and a bunch of institutional people started taking it more seriously. But no bull div here yet. And RSI in general hasn't really been too helpful, but it did have this bear div quality at the top, along with the multiplier sell signal. GRT, not really something I've ever looked at, but this does have a growing bullish divergence. Not a lot of chart history. Overall, the trend has been basically bearish since February. It got listed just before January, lifted off from January to early February, and then is essentially just sold off ever since. Rune also painting a bullish divergence here on the lows, but for me, this is just still, it's up like 500% still, right? So it's a tough buy up here. There's a ton of volume. I think this is an all-time high in volume on this low, which is what you want to see. You want to see people caring about price action, greed, euphoria, whatever, anger, fear, aggression. That's what puts in tops and bottoms. So it's a good sign, but overall trend is still bearish. And the yearly open is back here at like $1.50, right? And the bottom line really is this thing isn't going to move without you. You can be a hero and try to buy lows, catch knives, but the cloud on the 12-hour was dead accurate for being bullish ever since November, ever since the cloud like started painting, telling you to get out and then get back in March, and then telling you to get out mid-May. So that's a really great run, set and forget it type trade. And right now it's nowhere near that on the bull side. SUSHI looks like it's in a lot of trouble. Again, it's got this curvature to RSI that hasn't yet flipped up, right? So if this looked like it was bottoming, we would start to see a growing bullish divergence, which we're not. We're seeing a really aggressive descending diagonal line support here that looks like it's just going to puke out the bottom. Yearly open is back here at like 250, 230, somewhere like that. Definitely volume support down here. So for me, I'm a knife buyer down here. I'm not touching this thing until we get some sort of puke. And again, volume quite low, really. It hasn't really picked up yet. So not a lot of people scared just yet. And if anything, you're just seeing this perpetual emission of all of these tokens, just get kind of sold off into nothing. Trend-wise, definitely bearish below the 200, below the cloud. There's no redeeming bullishness here. Definitely different than November to March, trend-wise. Comp, again, this curvature looks like it wants retrace to yearly open. It had bear divs. It's working on a bull div, and ultimately 150 looks like a good target for some sort of capitulation. Volume's picking up slowly here, but not as large as it was on May 18th, probably due to liquidation spikes at that time. Trend-wise, this is definitely bearish. Below the 200, below the cloud, nothing, there's no bullishness here. So I like 150 or less as far as the knife catch which is still significantly lower. Not looking too great there. Wi-Fi's on the super aggressive descending diagonal resistance, just hugging this sub 50 RSI the entire time and setting up for a death cross on the daily below the first volume support. 2100 is the next stop, and then below that it's 14, and then some sort of capitulation to the downside. For the most part, alts, when they rise, when they fall, always end in some sort of parabolic downside, parabolic upside, because alts represent usually the weakest of the hands, and you see a ton of emotion here when we're just selling off, selling off, selling off. People panic, they panic sell, causing more people to panic sell, right? So I think Wi-Fi TVL can continue to go to infinity, but the token itself looks ready for additional downside, certainly. No bull div here yet either. Something else to watch for in all of these. Momentum's still not on Wi-Fi side. And you can see this subtle curvature here as well. Here's SNX, which is in a lot of trouble, partially due to the single collateral underlying for their synthetic assets. When you start liquidating that stuff on chain, it just pushes everybody's collateral lower, and then more people have to collateralize. If they don't, you get a margin cascade, basically. That's kind of what we're seeing here, where we're just liquidating people left and right. There was a big liquidation the other day. They had some trouble with the euro pair, I think. I don't know. Lots of issues with just the protocol working as intended, but destroying the price in the process. Bear cross below VPVR support. This is KuCoin. I don't really trust any of the volume here, but you can see how there was emotion here, and now there's nothing, right? So it's kind of dying in the dark, just dripping slower and slower. Did hit the monthly pivot, did have this massive parabolic downside that hasn't quite yet puked out the bottom. And I don't really know where support for SNX is at this point. Sub 5 probably. You can see these curvatures and RSI hasn't quite started to curve back up yet. So definitely bearish there. This is the 365 MA. It's just now getting into that buy zone. And there really hasn't been a bear market ever for SNX. This is all like prehistoric history basically on KuCoin, which started to trade this before everybody else. And these, again, these parabolic downsides with SNX probably related more to the protocol and how the liquidations happen with those synthetic assets than emotions necessarily with altcoin people, but that goes hand in hand, certainly. And here's SNX on the pitchfork using the line chart, and it's just way outside, right? Like, this just looks over to me as far as a multi-year trend perspective. It just needs a lot of time to figure itself out. Here's BNT, and these were the bear market curvatures. You can see how it's not perfect, right? But you start to get bullish divergences toward the end. You attempt some sort of bounce. Here we had these curvatures, and now we have a massive bull div here, but downside volume-wise looks, another 50%, and it might be ready. Just now getting the death cross. Does not look like anything I want to hold, just looks like it wants to melt lower. Probably sub 2. No confidence there. Here's UMA, which is just a hilarious chart. Easy come, easy go. It's basically a gap up, if you're familiar with that on Legacy. It gapped up and then it gapped down, and it's back to its yearly open, right? Like, this is what could happen for everything. Just now death crossing back in this volume support. But I want to see this stuff not only retrace to its January open, but then reconsolidate for 3 to 6 months in that zone again to be confident that that all of DeFi can really have a shot towards Q4. And no bull div yet, even on this massive lower low. So that needs some time. Curve, just kind of stagnating sideways. Again, curve TVL can go to infinity, but ultimately the token doesn't look so hot. Death crossing. Supports sub $1, maybe 50 cents to buy for me. Trend-wise, not bullish. Volume's way down. Maybe to all-time lows on Binance. This is just nothing, right? There's nobody here. Nobody's home. Not even a bull div yet because it hasn't put in a lower low relative to the last low in May. So it's okay to be bullish, these platforms with bearish token prices. Here's 1 inch on the 4 hour. Definitely below the previous range. Attempted to break that range, just can't, and ultimately just looks like it wants. It's up 264. But in 1 inch's case, at least it's drawing this history of support resist levels You know, what you don't want is this UMA thing where you go straight up, straight down, because then there's nothing. There's just a gap in between, right? At least with 1 inch, you're getting lots of really tight volume between $1 and $5. And we're still drawing that in, but it needs some time. So definitely not bullish on that either. Ren putting a bull div death crossed mid-May. Trend-wise just looks, you know, looks like 12 to 5 cents. Maybe 5 cents it's a buy. Again, you get this RSI curvature that hasn't yet begun to swing to the upside. Definitely a comeback again in 3 to 6 months. Bell, another beautiful RSI curvature here. Basically retrace completely to the yearly open, back into this volume area. I was certainly more optimistic up here, even with the bear div, that this was more of an ascending triangle than a rising wedge. Didn't matter. Broke down in a spectacular fashion. Death cross. Still no bull div here. Just a crazy looking chart to not even put in a bull div. So this definitely needs some time, but I like where it sits relative to the listing in pre-2021. This looks like it could just go for all-time lows at this point. Nobody wanted to hold on to this thing. I don't know if it's got an emission issue with volume relative to what's traded, but this thing sold off harder than almost everything else. Lastly, I'll just mention the ETH-BTC fund and the DeFi portfolio. I trade for Techemy Capital and Enzyme Finance. You can send Ether USDC or just watch what I'm doing into the smart contract. And the DeFi portfolio did have most of the coins that I discussed in the video up until a couple days ago and a week ago. And you can see all the trades I make through DEXs, how that all happens, the amounts, everything I'm doing. The same with the ETH-BTC fund. Both right now are just in cozy stablecoin on Aave collecting interest. That's all for this one. Like, dislike, comment, share, subscribe, and happy trading.